In the second video for this week, we are going to look at the eras in the history of mission, very broadly organized. The first era we're going to look at is the first 1,000 years. I said it was broadly organized. This is just a simple overview to help you, to give you a framework as you read history, because history is complicated. So some of you will really enjoy the complicated history, and for others of you, it will be important to have a simple framework. So I'm going to jump in. So when we talk about mission in the early church, we're talking about the process of the church going beyond Judaism. And it goes in all directions. It first goes east and south, and then it goes north and west. And during the first phase of the first 1,000 years, we don't really have Christianity. We have Christianities. That's Dr. Roberts' phrase. That's Dr. Roberts' description of a situation where there were really a number, not only of different doctrines, but of different cultural incarnations of Christianity. And of course, there was a real desire among the whole church to identify their common ground, and the Council of Nicaea did that largely, but it didn't erase the culture wars. From there, you see a very different picture in the West and in the East. So in the West, many people think that the Christendom, which is Christianity as a territorial faith, that Christendom started with Constantine, but Dr. Hanselis says that it actually started with the collapse of the Roman Empire and with the Germanic tribes, that's where we had a situation where a number of kings became Christians and led their people through mass conversions. And that's when territorial Christianity was really born. So you can decide that you think it started with Constantine, or you can think that you can agree with Dr. Hanselis that it started with the Germanic tribes. But either way, we did end up with Christendom in the West, the North and the West. And the primary method of mission expansion in Christendom was kings and territorial bishops. However, there was a monastic movement. There was more than one monastic movement. And monks were able to spread the gospel in a very different way, and in a way that was much more accessible for peasants. So the monks and the peasants were mission expansion from below, and the kings and the bishops were mission expansion from above. In the East, you had a very different situation because Christianity was a minority faith. So it was primarily spread by wandering ascetic monks and by monasteries that were centers of learning. They were successful in their mission. They were able to reach out to India, to China, and to Russia. And of course, in the year 1054 AD, you had the separation of the Eastern and Western Church. Now I'm going to do a quick overview of the second 1,000 years. So we begin to move into the age of colonialism. And I did forget to mention that Christendom was at war with Islam, at least for a certain period of time during the Crusades. And that was important for Christendom's self-identity. However, you didn't have yet a colonial relationship with anywhere else in the world until you begin to see that in the 1400s with Catholic colonialism. And that was characterized by the use of force, by unholy alliances between the conquistadores and the church. But at the same time as you have that, you also have the Jesuits practicing enculturation. So doing mission in a way that exhibited profound respect for the cultures that they entered into, and profound concern for the well-being of the people. And of course, we saw that clearly in China and Japan, but we also saw it in Latin America. Wherever the Jesuits were not the only monastic order, nor even the only clerical organization that actually cared about the people. In a number of cases, the clergy acted as a buffer between the worst abuses of colonialism and the protection of the people themselves. They also sometimes acted as a bridge to the resources that the colonists provided. That the colonists did have access to certain kinds of resources. And so clerics, primarily monks, but some other clerics as well, acted as a buffer against the worst abuse and as a bridge to some of the resources. Of course, not all of them did. Some of them were just in collusion. 100 years later, we had the Protestant Reformation. And the general consensus is that the Protestant Reformation was not concerned about global mission. They had too much to deal with already. They did form national churches and they emphasized personal initiative, both of which played a role later in mission. But of course, the Protestant Reformation took full advantage of the printing press, and it would be hard to say that the printing press was not important for world mission. The Anabaptists were also a clear exception, that the Anabaptists did have a missionary consciousness and missionary practice. Then we move into the age of Protestant colonialism, which was similar in many ways to Catholic colonialism. We're still looking at expansion of the church through trade and military force, but the impulse that was equivalent to the enculturation of that practiced by the Jesuits was vernacularization, which was the emphasis on translation. That when you put the gospel in the language of the people, there was a power that was transferred at that point. There was an empowerment process that went on. There was also a struggle by Protestant leaders for the abolition of slavery, which was successful in Britain quite a ways before it was successful in the United States. Then we see the move into, at the turn of the 20th century, we see the move into what Dr. Robert calls evangelical populism. So we see international revival, we see missionary families, which allows for a much higher level of migration, and migration fuels mission, which we'll talk about later. We also see the leadership of mission moving away from the church, at least in the Protestant context, and moving to Western mission societies. And we also see indigenous agents, indigenous partners carrying out mission. And of course, when in the week that we work with Dr. Hansel's work, we'll go into that in much more depth. Lastly, we want to do an overview of the current age. And I'm dating this from the second half of the 20th century until now. This is a post-colonial age, although I would say that there are some forms of colonialism that still exist, but they are neither as strong nor in as much control. We are all confronting secularism, which in Europe has basically won in terms of the vast majority of the people. In the United States, it is gaining ground rapidly, and what changes our statistics about the levels of belief and practice in society are primarily Christian immigrants. Development as part of mission really began in the second half of the 20th century. Liberation theologies is an important development that also started in the second half of the 20th century. The charismatic movements, which fuel the majority of the growth in the church in the global south, Pentecostal and Neo-Pentecostal movements, are also part of our current age of mission. And then what you could either call reverse mission or multi-directional mission, depending on which theories you prefer, and the international networks that go with it. I would just want to leave you with one little statistic, which is we believe that by 2025, that 48% of the Christian church around the world will be in Africa and Latin America, which we're going to talk about next week as we talk about the 20th century shifts in mission. Thank you.